Welcome to the end of the first month of the Energy Sovereignty Project. We're going to do 31 days and 31 minutes, so we better get started. Right. Well, the format of this is going to be basically 31 days and 32 minutes, so grab your favorite beverage and let's get started. If any of you find that you don't care for this format, let us know. We can work through that. So what I'm going to do is, the idea is that as you're watching this, each minute is one day, and so at any point you just go to that minute and you'll be able to see the data from that day. That was the plan here. So let's get to it. All right. So obviously starts off with January 1st. We had a nice party at a friend of mine in Marin, great folk, and he's also real interested in what we've got going, and so we raised a toast to the start of the thing, and then I set the system to self-powered mode at midnight, and that's basically what you have there. It's kind of silly to do that, obviously, as we discussed before when we were going over some of those numbers. To start it at 100%, we're not really going to use all that much before we get to the start of solar production on the following day. And here we have the second. So on the second, what you see is that when we started the production for the day, we were at 78%. Well, I mean, it's a sunny day and we're going to be cranking, right? So what wound up happening there, obviously, was we get to that 100% point, and then it starts kicking the system off. It's like, oh shoot, okay, well that was a mistake. So live and learn. You know, that's why we're doing these tests. So, but then we realize, okay, well, you know, we're going to have to start to monitor the power better, see maybe what we need to do with the power. And so then coming up here, we've got the third. So then here was a maintenance day. What wound up happening there is we were discussing earlier, we had that issue where the system was kicking off the solar edge inverter, and we had to figure out why it was doing that, and that was where we discovered that it was because of the temperature. We had some bitterly cold mornings, and because the batteries had basically just come off the truck, they didn't have an opportunity to warm up, I guess, from the inside. They hadn't been running that long, and so, you know, whatever, kicked it off. And so once we got done with that, then we were able to kick the system back on, and we luckily, following that, we had a couple of days of sunlight to go ahead and do that. And so here we see again the production status back at a partially sunny day, starting the day at 39%, and we got, you know, decent charge off of it, ending the total solar day at 51%. The interesting thing here was that we were tracking how much the home used each evening, and that was really interesting to find that there was almost exactly 20% day by day, you know, depletion from the time that the system stopped producing power till the time that it started producing power the following day, and then that came out to right in that 16 to 18 kilowatt hour range just perfectly tracking. And so on January 5th, we had rainy days, and so now we get to that point where, oh shoot, you know, you're going to have to make a decision here pretty soon to figure out, you know, what's their forecast. You know, and in our case, it was going to be for several rainy days to come, and so then we went and wanted to reserve that power, since the Tesla was not going to allow us to charge from the grid. And just a couple little charts there to kind of show that we were at that decision point. That was what those were designed to show, and that, you know, we had a weather forecast available to us so that we knew what was coming, and so then we needed to go ahead and turn grid power back on to make sure that we could get through that stormy period. And then on January 6th, basically the same thing. You know, the very stormy conditions, high winds, a lot of rain, and again showing that charging of the system, but only using, you know, what was available to us. I was actually shocked that we had gotten as much charge as we did. 3.6 kilowatts to me was astounding, given the weather that was going on that day. So then we start to come up out of this wet weather slowly, and as we did so on the 7th and 8th, we were able to get a little more charge put in. If you'll notice on this, you got the total solar day percentage at 20%, and then the next day is at 36%. And so the little by little we were putting stuff in. And again, this was quite a rainy day. So again, 4.3 kilowatts was pretty impressive for a peak amount of power going in. So it was pretty impressive. And so then, let's see, was there anything else to talk about here? No, basically just quite a bit of rainy weather. You notice too that we did, you know, because of the switching, the system does actually put a little bit of power to the grid, which was annoying. And then we were able to put 14.1 kilowatt hours. That should say kilowatt hours. I'll have to go through and edit that. 14.1 kilowatt hours to the power wall. So that was pretty good for as bad as the day was. And so then on the 8th, same thing. Sun started to come out a little bit, but not you know, not anything appreciable, as you can see by the peak production numbers. It's still only 1.1 kilowatts. Total daily production was 4.8 kilowatt hours. Pretty decent, but you know, they for, you know, given the weather, but not a lot going in. Slowly but surely, that the total solar day percentage, the percentage that was recorded in the battery, is creeping up. And then we get to the 9th. So on the 9th, it starts to get you know, a little more interesting. But still, again, very rainy, very overcast. This still, again, was allowing us to track the amount of usage in the home. So that gave us some good data to use there. But really, that was all that we were able to get out of the 9th. Also, as it says there, you know, it was one of those days where we were away from home for quite a bit, so there wasn't a lot of usage in the home. And then on the 10th, we're back up to kind of a standard use for the home, generally in the low 20s as far as how much power was used. And this day was very, like the notes say there, very, very dense fog. It did wind up clearing a little bit later in the day, going to rain, but not soon enough really to give any help to the system. But again, you can see the total solar day percentage, even with the foggy days and the rainy days, it's creeping up. It would have been nice to be able to actually just take a hit from the grid and then meter that out over these days. That would have kept us from pulling power in the middle of the day from the grid. And on the 11th, sun's starting to come out. Total solar day 79%. Again, we're still drawing off of the grid, trying to charge the battery. But a decent production day here with 15.5 kilowatt hours. And the 12th, again, this is where we put it back on zombie apocalypse mode. And you can see the numbers here. We managed to get the system back up to 100%. We had a lot of energy put in that day. We actually, to the power wall, we were actually able to put 21.7 kilowatts, and that topped the system off. And so then again, this allowed us to see what the drop was over the course of the evening. And so the important takeaways here was that the percentage of the charge at first solar contribution was 80%. So we were still way up there, right? And so even with the cloudy weather, we were pretty easily able to get up to the point where the system was kicking off, kicking the system off. And so now we start getting into that situation where we have to do something with the additional power that we're getting. And so again, percentage of charge at the first solar contribution after that evening fall off of about 20%, we're at 79%. And we didn't get a lot of production that day. The total production that you can see there is 8.3 kilowatt hours, so not a whole lot. We managed to put 3.5 into the power wall, but we'd drawn 15. Not really a lot to say about the 15th. Overcast and rainy. Good opportunity to kind of compare over the last couple of days to be able to see how much was used in the evenings as opposed to how much was returned, and you can see that gradual depreciation when you look at the total solar day percentage. Again, that number is really important. And so then again here, you know, when you see the total solar day, we're down to 20%. We had thunderstorms, high winds, not much production at all. I mean, you can see the peak production is 0.7 kilowatts. On these days, I'm always kind of amazed that we even put anything in, you know. But again, you can see today that day was on the 16th. There was not much in there at all. And this was an interesting day too, in that we actually had we had tornadoes that were warned of just south of where we are. But again, the storm watch didn't kick in at all. Another rainy day. Managed to get 10.2 kilowatt hours into the power wall, so that was pretty good. Got a little bit of sunshine on the 18th. It managed to clear up a little bit right when we were at our peak production time, so we did manage to get quite a bit of charge. And again, you can see we're off of zombie apocalypse mode here because we needed to reserve some power for the storms. Sun's starting to come out again. We got to wind up with a couple of good sunny days in a row here, and it very quickly drove the percentage in the power wall back up to 100%. Not a lot else to say about the 19th. On the 20th, you'll notice again, on the 19th here we got 64% for that total solar day percentage. And so then here on the 20th, boom, 78%. And again, at this point, the home is on its self-powered mode, but the reserve is set to 100%, and that's why when you see that from Powerwall, that still sits at 0 kilowatt hours. Trying to get every last bit of allowable power back into the batteries. And then here we come across the last 10 days of January, and this is where it gets really cool. So you can see again, total solar day percentage 78%, and as expected, boom, next day we hit that 100%. We actually wound up spitting out a little bit of power back to the grid, 7 kilowatt hours. And because of the forecast, I'm like, uh-oh, you know, now let's see what we sit at on the next day. That was kind of my my thought process. But even by midnight that night, I realized, uh-oh, you know, we're going to need to do something to get rid of the extra power. The home usage sat, you know, right at that area between 20 and 30 kilowatt hours. It was a little higher use on that day. We had some folks over. And now on the 22nd, same thing. Boom, that 98%. What that was is that the system topped out and actually wound up shutting off. And so you know, when you look at the grid's disconnected now, and so there's no place to put the excess power. I believe, what did the notes say here? Yeah, so I believe this was the day that this was the day that I turned the system back on. I still left it as zombie apocalypse mode. I was just turning it on briefly, just so that some of that power would get exported rather than just completely wasted. But it wasn't enough to speak of. And then January 23rd. We start our first little bit of experimental driving. Had to do something to get rid of the additional power. Did a little quick test, city driving, just to kind of see what that amount of power to the vehicle would give us. 2 kilowatt hours, 5.6 miles. And then the next day did the same thing. This time though, we put 5 kilowatt hours into the car. Did a little driving test, burned off 16 miles. Again, pretty linear progression from what we saw before. And again, the interesting thing, I mentioned this briefly in some of the other updates, the thing to remember about this is that this is just charging the car and then using it immediately. This doesn't include things like depletion for what's called vampire losses or housekeeping losses in the car. You'll typically lose 1 or 2%, depending on the time of year, overnight. Not a huge amount, but again, you're not getting everything that you put into the car if you wait. so then again, the following day, I put the same amount in, 5 kilowatts, but instead of driving it off, burning it off like an idiot, I thought, okay, well now let's get back into a more normal driving pattern. And so I just did my normal driving to and from the studio, a couple of errands, because that's how the system is going to be used. That's how people are going to actually charge their car. And so this obviously was subject to some of those losses, and that was why I started to record all of the other pertinent information, the vehicle odometer readings and start and stop percentages, that type of a thing. And so that way we'll be able to track that more closely as we continue on. And then the following day was when I made my big mistake. So what had happened was the previous evening, the 25th, I knew that the following day, Saturday, I was going to be using the car to go into the city, and so I set the system to trickle charge the car. Well, I set it on 5 amps, but the charger is a high capacity charger. It's a 240 volt charger, and so that charged the car, I think it was 1.2 kilowatts the entire evening. And so by the time I came out, it had a little over 10 kilowatts. I thought, oh, okay, well, you know, we'll go ahead and put that into the vehicle and use that to get around on that day. And so that's what I did. I went and made it an even 15 kilowatts and drove it. Following day, again, driving around various errands and that kind of a thing, wound up putting 17 miles on the car. You can go ahead and crunch those numbers from the mileage and that kind of a thing, and kind of get an idea of how the car was being used. And then by the 28th, I kind of realized my mistake. It's like, uh-oh. Because then we get projected that we're going to have a couple of rainy days coming. And I thought, okay, shoot, am I going to have enough time to replenish the battery? Initially, I was looking at, I'll have 5 kilowatts per day or so to be able to replenish the battery, but that just wasn't to be. So the next day here we see we had quite a bit of fog, and so again you're looking at that total solar day percentage. Now it's 46. We weren't able to fully recover from the day before. It was looking, what was that, a 4% loss, 6% loss, something like that. And then again, as we go into January 29th, keep an eye on that total solar day percentage. And again, we had a subtle loss. 36% total solar day. Just kind of creeping downward. But what you can see from this is that even though you have a rainy day or a cloudy day or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, that the system does actually keep up pretty well. I mean, by this time, we're on zombie apocalypse mode for, a week. January 30th was our 9th day of running completely off grid. And that brings us to the 30th. 30th and the 31st. Those are the 10 days off of grid power. Pretty impressive run. Not much to say about that, other than what we're shown. So the total solar day, you can see that slowly starting to degrade. We know that we're going to lose about 20% in the evening, and so in other words, if you have 20%, then you may not make it to start a solar production the following day. And so that's kind of right there at that, ooh, you know, you better watch it range. And so with 32, you know, we're going to have to switch it back, obviously, especially since we had some rainy weather forecasted. And that's about it. So with that, we'll cut over to a little bit of a bonus review of those 10 days that we ran off grid. Well, thanks for hanging out to the end of this entire month in review. So let's end this with a little bit of a bonus. We'll talk a little bit about the zombie apocalypse mode and the fun that we've had with this for the last 10 days. So as in the previous video, also in this video, we discussed a little bit about some of the mistakes made about trying to put too much of a charge in the car at a time in the year when we weren't quite ready. Well, we've hit another series of very cloudy days, and I just don't have the freeboard. Right now the system's sitting at about 15%. It's been holding its own. It could probably go for another couple of days. But now I'm going to go ahead and put the system back on the grid, at least for just a couple of days. And I'm hoping to really minimize the amount of time that we go back on the grid. And again, at the end of next month, just like we did with this month, we'll report those monthly numbers so that we can all kind of go over them. But let's switch the power back on for now. Well, I got the pavement laid, so it's nice not to have to do this in the mud. Alrighty, here we go. Back on grid power. This is as much the end of January as it is the beginning of February. So what we've just done is to go back on grid, as you just saw. And that brings us to 233 hours and 14 minutes on zombie apocalypse mode. Now that's up until January 22nd, or back until January 22nd. As you recall, we actually turned it on the 1st, and we did that for a total of 22 hours and 54 minutes. So those two you can add together for our total. I actually turned it back on grid power just briefly, not because I needed charge from the grid, but because I needed someplace to put the extra power, and the car wasn't available. Just I hadn't prepped the car for that yet. And so there we go. What a month! And so thanks for following along so far. Let's go ahead and make this just kind of a little bonus closeout here. So we've learned a lot in just this 1 month. It'll be interesting to follow this into February to see how much power I have to use before I can get back on zombie apocalypse mode. I'm thinking that it's only going to be a couple of days. So what that does is it takes the burden and allows the house to then run off of the grid while solar trickles into the battery. We're sitting at about 12% right now as far as battery charge. So I would think that I would need to get that up to maybe 30%, 40%, and then that will get us through to Monday and Tuesday, when we're supposed to start to get a little bit of sunny weather again. And so again, we'll keep doing that, just kind of a minimum amount on the grid. I don't expect that we'll be on the grid much more than maybe another week or two at most, and then we'll be the system will be free running. So I think that if I would not have made the mistake of putting that much charge into the vehicle, I think that we probably would have easily made it until Monday or Tuesday. So that's unfortunate. I apologize for that, but that's why we're doing this. So again, thanks for following. This has been a neat month. I look forward to many more. If this is the first video that you've come to, feel free to like and subscribe and follow along. See some of the previous videos, see what got us up to this point. And as always, we have our content driven by our comments largely. So if there are tests that you'd like to see or additional data that you'd like to see presented, definitely give us a shout in the comment section. And good luck to all of you with your own projects.